Sarah Mitchell stood in front of her bedroom mirror, adjusting the pale pink bridesmaid dress for what felt like the 100th time. Today was supposed to be the happiest day in her best friend Emma's life, but Sarah's hands trembled as she applied. Her lipstick. The small glass vial hidden in her purse seemed to burn through the leather, a constant reminder of what she was about to do. The two women had been inseparable since childhood. They grew up on the same street in the quiet town of Millbrook, sharing secrets, dreams, and everything else that young girls hold dear. Emma was always the golden child, beautiful, intelligent, and effortlessly charming. She had long blonde hair that caught the sunlight perfectly, and a laugh that could light up any room. Sarah, on the other hand, lived in her shadow. She was pretty enough, but not stunning. Smart, but not brilliant. Kind, but not magnetic like Emma. Their friendship had survived high school crushes, college separations, and the challenges of adult life. When Emma announced her engagement to David Richardson, Sarah had forced a smile and offered her congratulations. David was everything Emma deserved, successful, handsome, and completely devoted to her. He owned a thriving construction company and had built Emma the house of her dreams on the outskirts of town. But Sarah harbored a secret that had been eating away at her for months. She had been having an affair with David for over a year. It started innocently enough. She had gone to him for help renovating her small apartment, and one thing led to another. David claimed he loved her, that he was only marrying Emma because he couldn't bear to hurt her. He promised Sarah that after the wedding, he would find a way to divorce Emma and they could be together properly. Sarah had believed him at first. She convinced herself that David was trapped in an engagement he didn't want, that he was only trying to do the right thing by Emma. But as the wedding date approached, Sarah began to see the truth. David wasn't going to leave Emma. He was using Sarah, keeping her as a secret while building a life with her best friend. The betrayal cut deep, but what made it worse was watching Emma's pure joy as she planned her wedding. Emma would call Sarah every day, excited about flower arrangements, dress fittings, and honeymoon plans. She talked about how lucky she was to have found David, how she couldn't wait to start their life together. Each conversation was like a knife twisting in Sarah's heart. 3 weeks before the wedding, Sarah had gone to David one last time. She begged him to call off the wedding, to choose her instead of Emma. David had laughed cruelly and told her she was being ridiculous. He said Emma was his future, and Sarah was just a fun distraction. He told her that if she ever told Emma about their affair, he would make sure everyone in town knew what kind of person she really was. That night, Sarah sat alone in her apartment, consumed by rage and heartbreak. She had lost the man she thought she loved, and she was about to watch her best friend marry him, completely unaware of his betrayal. The unfairness of it all overwhelmed her. Emma had everything: beauty, success, love, while Sarah had nothing but secrets and pain. It was then that the dark thought first entered her mind. What if Emma couldn't marry David? What if something happened to prevent the wedding? Sarah tried to push the thoughts away, but they kept returning, growing stronger each day. She began researching online, learning about different substances that could cause illness. She told herself she was just curious, that she would never actually hurt Emma. But as the wedding day drew closer, Sarah's desperation grew. She watched Emma glowing with happiness, completely trusting and innocent, and the injustice of it all consumed her. Emma had stolen David from her without even knowing it. Emma had everything Sarah wanted and would never appreciate it the way Sarah would. 2 days before the wedding, Sarah made her decision. She visited a chemistry lab where she had once worked as a temporary assistant. Using her old access card, she entered late at night and carefully measured out a small amount of ricin, a highly toxic substance derived from castor beans. She had researched it extensively, Just a tiny amount would be enough to cause severe illness, possibly death. She convinced herself she only wanted to make Emma sick enough to postpone the wedding, giving Sarah time to expose David's affair and win him back. On the morning of the wedding, Sarah arrived early at the church to help Emma get ready. The bride looked radiant in her flowing white gown, her face glowing with excitement. Emma hugged Sarah tightly and thanked her for being such an amazing friend, for always being there through everything. The words made Sarah's stomach turn, but she smiled and helped Emma with her makeup and hair. The wedding ceremony was beautiful. Emma walked down the aisle like a princess, her eyes locked on David's face. Sarah stood at the altar as maid of honor, watching the man she loved promise to love and cherish her best friend forever. When David kissed Emma at the end of the ceremony, Sarah felt something inside her break completely. The reception was held in the church hall, decorated with white roses and twinkling lights. Sarah had been placed in charge of serving the drinks, a responsibility she had volunteered for weeks earlier. As the evening progressed, Sarah waited for her moment. She watched Emma laugh and dance, surrounded by friends and family who adored her. The bride looked so happy, so alive, so completely unaware that her best friend was about to betray her in the most horrible way possible. When Emma stepped outside for a moment to get some fresh air, Sarah saw her chance. She quickly added the contents of the small vial to Emma's champagne glass, her hands shaking as she stirred it carefully to ensure it dissolved completely. The liquid looked exactly the same, clear, bubbly, and innocent. Sarah's heart pounded as she carried the glass outside to where Emma stood alone on the church steps looking up at the stars. Emma smiled when she saw Sarah approaching and accepted the champagne gratefully. She raised the glass in a toast to their friendship and took a long, deep drink. Sarah watched in frozen horror as Emma swallowed the poison, realizing in that moment the full magnitude of what she had done. Within an hour of drinking the poisoned champagne, Emma began to feel unwell. At first, she attributed it to wedding day nerves and excitement. Her stomach felt queasy, and she had developed a slight headache. But she pushed through, determined not to let anything ruin her perfect day. Sarah watched from across the reception hall, her guilt growing stronger with each passing minute as she observed Emma's subtle signs of distress. Emma excused herself from the dance floor where she had been swaying happily with David. She told him she needed to freshen up and headed toward the church restroom. Sarah followed at a distance, her heart racing with a mixture of terror and concern. She found Emma gripping the bathroom sink, her face pale and drawn. Beads of sweat had formed on her forehead despite the cool evening air. "Emma, are you okay?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The irony of asking this question when she was the cause of Emma's suffering made her feel sick herself. Emma looked up at her reflection in the mirror, then at Sarah standing behind her. "I don't feel very well," she admitted, her voice weak. "My stomach is churning and I feel dizzy. Maybe I ate something bad, or maybe it's just all the excitement catching up with me." Sarah's mind raced. The ricin was working faster than she had expected. According to her research, it could take hours or even days for symptoms to appear, but Emma was already showing signs of poisoning. Panic began to set in as Sarah realized she might have used too much of the substance, or perhaps Emma's smaller body weight made her more susceptible to its effects. "Maybe you should sit down for a few minutes," Sarah suggested, helping Emma to a chair in the corner of the restroom. "The reception can wait. Everyone will understand if you need a break." But Emma shook her head stubbornly. "No, this is my wedding day. I've waited my whole life for this moment. I'm not going to let a little stomach bug ruin it." She stood up slowly, gripping Sarah's arm for support. "Just help me get back out there. I'll be fine." They returned to the reception together, but Emma's condition continued to deteriorate. She tried to maintain her composure, smiling and chatting with guests, but Sarah could see the effort it was taking. Emma's hands shook when she held her water glass, and she had to excuse herself twice more to go to the bathroom. David noticed something was wrong and kept asking if she was okay, but Emma insisted she was just tired. As the evening wore on, Emma's symptoms became impossible to hide. She began experiencing severe abdominal pain that made her double over. Her skin took on a grayish pallor, and she started having difficulty breathing. The wedding guests began to murmur with concern as they watched the bride struggle to stay upright. Sarah's terror reached new heights as she watched her best friend suffer. This wasn't what she had wanted. She had convinced herself that she only wanted to make Emma sick enough to postpone the wedding, but now she was witnessing the real effects of what she had done. The ricin was attacking Emma's cells, beginning the process of shutting down her body's vital functions. David finally insisted they call for medical help when Emma collapsed during the bouquet toss. She had been standing with the other unmarried women, trying to participate in the tradition, when she suddenly crumpled to the floor, clutching her stomach and gasping for air. The wedding guests screamed and rushed toward her as David knelt beside his new wife, calling her name frantically. Sarah stood frozen in the crowd, watching the chaos unfold. Someone had called 911, and she could hear the sirens approaching in the distance. Emma lay on the floor, semi-conscious and writhing in pain, while David held her hand and whispered reassurances. The beautiful white wedding dress was now wrinkled and stained with sweat, a stark contrast to how radiant Emma had looked just hours earlier. The paramedics arrived quickly and began working on Emma immediately. They checked her vital signs, started an IV, and peppered David with questions about what Emma had eaten or drunk that day. David mentioned that she had been complaining of stomach problems for the past hour, but nobody could think of anything that might have caused such severe symptoms. As the paramedics prepared to transport Emma to the hospital, one of them asked if anyone had noticed what the bride had consumed during the reception. Sarah's blood ran cold as several guests mentioned seeing Emma drink champagne throughout the evening. The paramedic asked who had been serving drinks, and multiple people pointed toward Sarah. Sarah felt the walls closing in around her as the paramedic approached. He asked routine questions about what drinks had been served and whether Sarah had noticed Emma consuming anything unusual. Sarah managed to stammer out answers, claiming she hadn't noticed anything out of the ordinary. Her voice sounded hollow and fake to her own ears, but the paramedic was focused on getting Emma to the hospital and didn't seem to notice her nervousness. The ambulance rushed Emma away with David by her side, leaving behind a reception hall full of shocked and confused wedding guests. Sarah helped clean up mechanically, her mind numb with the reality of what she had done. She had poisoned her best friend on what should have been the happiest day of Emma's life, and now Emma might die because of her jealousy and rage. The guests began to leave, whispering among themselves about what could have caused the bride to become so ill so suddenly. Some speculated about food poisoning from the catering, while others wondered if Emma had been hiding an illness. Sarah listened to their theories with growing dread, knowing that none of them suspected the truth. Emma's parents approached Sarah before leaving for the hospital. Emma's mother was crying, and her father looked shell-shocked. They thanked Sarah for being such a good friend to Emma and asked her to pray for their daughter's recovery. The kindness and trust in their voices made Sarah want to confess everything, but fear kept her silent. That night, Sarah sat in her apartment staring at her phone, waiting for news about Emma's condition. She had disposed of the empty vial and tried to eliminate any evidence of what she had done, but she couldn't erase the images of Emma suffering from her mind. She had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and now she had to live with the consequences of her actions. Around midnight, David finally called with an update. Emma was in critical condition at the hospital. The doctors were running tests to determine what had caused her sudden illness, but they were baffled by her symptoms. David's voice was broken and exhausted as he described how Emma was fighting for her life in the intensive care unit. Sarah realized that her plan had gone horribly wrong. Instead of simply postponing the wedding or making Emma sick enough to expose David's affair, she had potentially killed her best friend. The woman, who had trusted her completely, was now dying because of Sarah's selfish and twisted desire for revenge. For 3 days, Emma hovered between life and death in the intensive care unit. The doctors were puzzled by her condition, running test after test to determine what had caused such severe organ failure in an otherwise healthy young woman. Sarah visited the hospital daily, playing the role of the concerned best friend while secretly tormented by guilt and fear. David rarely left Emma's bedside. He held her hand and talked to her constantly, even though she remained unconscious and connected to multiple machines that monitored her failing body systems. Sarah watched him through the ICU window, seeing genuine love and desperation in his face. For the first time, she began to question whether David had ever really cared for her at all, or if she had simply been a convenient distraction from his real relationship with Emma. Emma's parents were devastated. Her mother had aged years in just a few days, her face etched with worry and exhaustion. Her father paced the hospital corridors like a caged animal, demanding answers from doctors who had none to give. They welcomed Sarah's presence, grateful for her support during their darkest hours. Their trust made Sarah's guilt even more unbearable. The medical team was baffled by Emma's symptoms. Her kidney function was rapidly declining, her liver was showing signs of damage, and her white blood cell count was dangerously low. The lead physician, Dr. Martinez, consulted with specialists from across the state, but none could definitively identify what was attacking Emma's body. They treated her symptoms and kept her stable on life support while continuing their investigation. On the 3rd day, Sarah overheard Dr. Martinez talking to Emma's parents about the possibility of poisoning. He explained that Emma's symptoms were consistent with exposure to a toxic substance, but they needed to run more specific tests to identify what it might be. Sarah's blood ran cold as she listened from the hallway, realizing that the doctors were getting closer to the truth. That evening, Sarah found herself alone with Emma for the first time since the wedding. David had gone home to shower and change clothes at the insistence of Emma's parents, and the nurses were busy with other patients. Sarah stood beside Emma's bed, looking down at her friend's pale, unconscious form connected to breathing tubes and monitoring equipment. Emma looked so fragile and vulnerable, nothing like the radiant bride she had been just days before. Her long blonde hair was matted and dull, and her skin had taken on a sickly yellow tinge. The steady beep of the heart monitor was the only sound in the room, a constant reminder that Emma's life hung by a thread. "I'm so sorry, Emma," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I never meant for this to happen. I was just so angry and hurt, and I wasn't thinking clearly. I loved him too, and I thought he loved me. But I was wrong about everything." As if responding to Sarah's voice, Emma's eyelids fluttered slightly. Sarah gasped and leaned closer, hoping for any sign that her friend might be regaining consciousness. For a moment, Emma's eyes opened, unfocused but definitely awake. She looked directly at Sarah, and though she couldn't speak due to the breathing tube, there seemed to be recognition in her gaze. "Emma, can you hear me?" Sarah asked urgently, pressing the call button for the nurse. "If you can understand me, try to blink." Emma blinked once, very slowly. Sarah's heart raced as she realized her friend was conscious and aware of her presence. She wanted to confess everything, to beg for forgiveness. But before she could say another word, nurses rushed into the room responding to the call button. The medical team was thrilled by Emma's return to consciousness. Dr. Martinez immediately began conducting neurological tests to assess her cognitive function. Emma's responses were weak but appropriate, indicating that her brain function remained intact despite the assault on her other organs. This development gave everyone hope that she might survive whatever was attacking her body. Over the next few hours, Emma gradually became more alert. The breathing tube was removed and she was able to whisper a few words, though speaking was clearly difficult and painful. David was overjoyed when he returned to find his wife awake and responsive. He held her hand gently and told her how scared he had been, how much he loved her, and how he had never left her side. Emma's first coherent question was about what had happened to her. David explained that she had become severely ill during their wedding reception and had been in the hospital ever since. Emma's memories of the wedding day were fragmented and confused, which the doctors explained was normal given the trauma her body had experienced. Sarah remained in the background during these interactions, watching the reunion between Emma and David with mixed emotions. She was relieved that Emma was alive and recovering, but she also felt increasingly isolated by her secret. The weight of what she had done was becoming unbearable, especially as she witnessed the genuine love between Emma and David. The next day brought more encouraging news. Emma's kidney function had stabilized, and some of her other organ systems were showing signs of improvement. Dr. Martinez was cautiously optimistic, though he emphasized that Emma would need extensive medical care and monitoring in the coming weeks and months. As Emma continued to recover, the investigation into the cause of her illness intensified. Dr. Martinez ordered comprehensive toxicology tests, including screens for exotic poisons and industrial chemicals. He also interviewed everyone who had been at the wedding, asking detailed questions about what Emma had eaten and drunk during the reception. Sarah's anxiety reached new levels as the investigation closed in around her. She had hoped that the medical team would eventually give up trying to identify the cause of Emma's illness and simply focus on her recovery, but Dr. Martinez was determined to find answers. He suspected that Emma had been deliberately poisoned and was working with hospital security to review surveillance footage from the wedding venue. Meanwhile, Emma was asking her own questions. Though still weak and confined to bed, she was alert enough to notice inconsistencies in the stories she was hearing about her wedding day. She remembered drinking champagne and talking with Sarah just before becoming ill, but the details were hazy. Something about that evening felt wrong to her, though she couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was. David had been staying at the hospital around the clock, sleeping in a chair beside Emma's bed and eating meals from the hospital cafeteria. Sarah noticed that he seemed different somehow, more mature and serious than she remembered. The crisis had changed him, stripping away the casual confidence he had always displayed and revealing a depth of emotion that Sarah had never seen before. One evening, as Sarah prepared to leave the hospital after another day of maintaining her facade of friendship, Emma called her over to the bedside. Emma's voice was still weak, but her eyes were clearer than they had been since the wedding. "Sarah," Emma whispered, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me." Sarah's heart began to pound as she approached the bed, certain that Emma was about to confront her about the poisoning. She prepared herself for the moment of truth, knowing that her lies were finally about to catch up with her. "Of course," Sarah replied, her voice barely steady. "You can ask me anything." Emma looked directly into Sarah's eyes with an intensity that made Sarah want to confess everything immediately. "Did you notice anything strange about David before the wedding? Did he seem worried or upset about something he wasn't telling me?" The question caught Sarah completely off guard. She had expected Emma to ask about the poisoning, not about David's behavior. Sarah realized that Emma was still trying to make sense of what had happened, and her instincts were telling her that something had been wrong even before she became ill. Sarah's mind raced as she stared at Emma's expectant face. The question about David's behavior before the wedding opened up a dangerous territory that Sarah hadn't prepared for. She could see that Emma's intuition was telling her something had been wrong, and Sarah realized this might be her chance to deflect attention away from the poisoning by revealing David's affair. "Why do you ask?" Sarah said carefully, buying herself time to think. "Did David say something to you?" Emma shifted uncomfortably in her hospital bed, wincing from the pain that still racked her body. "It's just a feeling I have," she explained. "I keep trying to remember details from the wedding day, and I have this nagging sense that David was acting strangely. Not during the ceremony itself, but in the weeks leading up to it. He seemed distracted, like his mind was somewhere else." Sarah's heart pounded as she realized Emma was already suspicious about David's faithfulness. This could be the perfect opportunity to expose his infidelity without revealing her own role in the poisoning. If Emma discovered David's affair, it might provide an alternative explanation for why someone might have wanted to hurt her on her wedding day. "Now that you mention it," Sarah said slowly, "I did notice David seemed a bit tense in the weeks before the wedding. I assumed it was just normal pre-wedding nerves, but maybe there was something more to it." Emma's eyes sharpened with interest. "What kind of things did you notice?" Sarah took a deep breath, knowing she was about to destroy Emma's marriage, but hoping it would save her from being exposed as a would-be murderer. "Well, there were a few times when I called his office and his secretary said he wasn't available, but then I'd see him around town during business hours. And once, when we were all supposed to have dinner together, he canceled at the last minute, claiming he had a work emergency, but his construction site was closed that day." These were all lies, but Sarah wove them together convincingly, mixing truth with fiction to create a plausible story. Emma listened intently, her face growing more troubled with each detail Sarah provided. "There's something else," Sarah continued, hating herself for manipulating Emma's trust but feeling trapped by her earlier actions. "The night before the wedding, I saw David's car parked outside that new apartment complex on Maple Street. Thought it was odd because I know he doesn't have any construction projects there." Emma's face went pale, and Sarah immediately regretted pushing so hard. Emma was still recovering from near-fatal poisoning and learning about her husband's potential. Infidelity was clearly devastating her further. "I'm sorry," Sarah said quickly. "I probably shouldn't have said anything. I'm sure there's an innocent explanation for everything I noticed. David loves you so much, Emma. You saw how worried he was when you were unconscious." But Emma was no longer listening to Sarah's backtracking. Her analytical mind, sharpened by years of working as an accountant, was putting pieces together. She remembered other small incidents that had seemed insignificant at the time. Hushed phone calls that ended when she entered the room, unexplained. Absences and David's occasional defensive behavior when she asked about his day. "Sarah," Emma said quietly, "I need you to do something for me. I need you to find out who lives in that apartment complex on Maple Street. Can you do that without David knowing?" Sarah felt trapped by her own lies. She had invented the story about David's car to deflect suspicion from herself, but now Emma was asking her to investigate further. If Sarah refused, Emma might become suspicious of her reluctance to help. If she agreed, she would have to continue building an elaborate web of deception. "Are you sure you want to know?" Sarah asked. "Maybe you should focus on getting better first and worry about other things later." Emma's expression hardened with determination. "Someone tried to kill me on my wedding day, Sarah. The doctors think I was poisoned deliberately. If David is hiding something from me, I need to know what it is. It could be connected to what happened." The connection Emma was drawing between David's suspected affair and her poisoning sent chills down Sarah's spine. Emma was developing a theory that David might have been involved in her poisoning, either directly or indirectly. This was getting dangerously close to the truth, but not in the way Sarah had expected. Over the next few days, Sarah found herself caught in an increasingly complex web of lies. She had to create fake evidence of David's affair while being careful, not to implicate herself. She spent hours researching the residents of the Maple Street apartment complex, eventually settling on a divorced woman named Lisa Chen, who worked at the bank where David had his business accounts. Sarah carefully crafted A story about David and Lisa, mixing real details about Lisa's life with fictional romantic encounters. She even went so far as to take photographs of David's truck parked near the bank, which she could claim was evidence of his visits to see Lisa. Meanwhile, Emma's recovery continued to progress. The doctors had finally identified ricin as the poison that had nearly killed her, though they still had no idea how she had been exposed to it. The discovery that Emma had been deliberately poisoned with such an exotic substance made headlines in the local newspaper and attracted the attention of the state police. Detective Ray Harrison was assigned to investigate Emma's case. He was an experienced investigator with a reputation for solving complex cases, and he began interviewing everyone who had attended the wedding reception. Sarah's interview was scheduled for the following Tuesday, and she spent days preparing for the questions he might ask. Emma's suspicions about David continued to grow, especially after Sarah presented her with the fabricated evidence of the affair. Emma confronted David while he was visiting her in the hospital, asking him directly about Lisa Chen and demanding to know the truth about their relationship. David was completely bewildered by Emma's accusations. He had never heard of Lisa Chen and had no idea why Emma thought he was having an affair. His genuine confusion and hurt at being accused of infidelity only convinced Emma that he was an accomplished liar. She began to wonder if David had poisoned her to collect on her life insurance policy and start a new life with his alleged mistress. The confrontation between Emma and David was devastating to witness. David pleaded with Emma to believe him, swearing on his mother's grave that he had never been unfaithful. Emma refused to listen, convinced that the evidence Sarah had provided was proof of his betrayal. She asked David to leave the hospital and told him she was filing for divorce as soon as she was well enough. Sarah watched this destruction of Emma and David's marriage with growing horror. She had created this situation to deflect suspicion from herself, but seeing the real pain she was causing made her realize how far she had fallen. She had poisoned her best friend and was now destroying her marriage with lies and manufactured evidence. David left the hospital in complete bewilderment, unable to understand how his wife could believe he would hurt her or cheat on her. He loved Emma with all his heart and had been devastated by her near-death experience. Now, just as she was recovering physically, their relationship was dying because of accusations he couldn't comprehend. That evening, Sarah sat alone in her apartment, surrounded by the web of lies she had created. She had newspaper clippings about the poisoning investigation, fake photographs of David's alleged affair, and notes about the stories she had told Emma. The weight of her deception was crushing her, but she felt powerless to stop the chain of events she had set in motion. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on Sarah. She had originally poisoned Emma because she was jealous of her perfect life with David. Now, through her lies about David's infidelity, she had successfully destroyed that perfect life. Emma and David's marriage was over, but not because David chose Sarah over Emma. Instead, Emma believed David was a cheating would-be murderer, and David was heartbroken and confused by accusations that made no sense to him. Sarah realized that she had gotten exactly what she thought she wanted. David was no longer married to Emma. But instead of feeling victorious, she felt empty and disgusted with herself. She had become a person she didn't recognize, someone capable of attempted murder and elaborate deception. The woman she had been before her obsession with David seemed like a stranger from another life. Detective Harrison's investigation was methodical and thorough. He had 20 years of experience solving complex crimes, and the deliberate poisoning of a bride on her wedding day was exactly the kind of case that demanded his full attention. He began by creating a timeline of events from the wedding reception and interviewing every person who had access to Emma's food and drinks. Sarah's interview took place on a Tuesday morning at the police station. She had practiced her story dozens of times, but sitting across from Detective Harrison in the small, sterile interview room made her realize how unprepared she actually was for this moment. Harrison was a calm, patient man who asked seemingly innocent questions that Sarah knew could expose her guilt if she wasn't careful. "Tell me about your relationship with Emma," Harrison began, his voice friendly but professional. "How long have you two been friends?" Sarah explained their childhood friendship, their shared history, and her role as maid of honor at the wedding. Harrison listened carefully, taking notes and occasionally asking for clarification. His questions seemed routine at first, but Sarah noticed how he kept returning to specific details about the reception. "You were in charge of serving drinks that evening, is that correct?" Harrison asked. "Yes," Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Emma asked me to help coordinate with the bartender and make sure the guests' glasses stayed filled. I was happy to help." "Did you notice Emma drinking anything unusual that evening? Anything different from what the other guests were having?" Sarah's heart raced, but she maintained her composure. "Not really. Everyone was drinking the same champagne and wine that the caterers provided. Emma had a glass of champagne when she was outside getting some fresh air, but that was the same champagne everyone else was drinking." Harrison made a note and looked up at Sarah with sharp, intelligent eyes. "Several witnesses mentioned seeing you bring Emma a glass of champagne when she stepped outside. Can you tell me about that?" Emma looked tired and a little overwhelmed, Sarah said, sticking to her prepared story. "I thought she might like a drink while she was taking a break from all the attention. I brought her a glass from the bar and we toasted to our friendship." "Did you prepare that glass specially for Emma, or did you take it from glasses that had already been poured for other guests?" The question was more specific than Sarah had expected, and she realized Harrison was probing for details that could reveal whether Emma's glass had been tampered with. "I think I took it from glasses that were already poured," she said carefully. "The bartender had several glasses ready on the bar." Harrison continued asking questions about the timeline of events, Emma's symptoms, and Sarah's observations throughout the evening. Sarah answered as truthfully as possible, while omitting the crucial detail of adding ricin to Emma's champagne. She thought she was handling the interview well until Harrison's questions took an unexpected turn. "Sarah, are you aware that Emma has been making some serious accusations about her husband, David?" Sarah's stomach dropped. She had hoped that Emma's suspicions about David would remain private, at least until the police investigation was complete. "What kind of accusations?" "She believes David has been having an affair and might have been involved in her poisoning," Harrison said, watching Sarah's reaction carefully. "She's provided some evidence to support these claims, including photographs and witness accounts. Do you know anything about David's alleged relationship with a woman named Lisa Chen?" Sarah realized that Emma had shared the fabricated evidence with the police, pulling them deeper into the web of lies Sarah had created. She had to be very careful now, because any inconsistencies in her story could expose her deception. "I did notice some things that seemed odd about David's behavior before the wedding," Sarah said, repeating the lies she had told Emma. "I mentioned them to Emma when she asked, but I never thought they meant he was having an affair." Harrison pressed for details, and Sarah found herself repeating and expanding on the fictional story she had created about David's infidelity. With each lie, she felt herself sinking deeper into a situation that was spiraling completely out of control. After the interview, Sarah drove home feeling sick with anxiety. She had managed to avoid directly incriminating herself in the poisoning, but she had also reinforced Emma's false beliefs about David's affair. Now the police were investigating David as a potential suspect in his own wife's attempted murder. That evening, Sarah's phone rang. It was David, and his voice was strained with exhaustion and desperation. "Sarah, I need your help," he said. "The police think I tried to kill Emma because she believes I'm having an affair with some woman I've never even met. Emma won't talk. To me, her parents think I'm a monster, and I don't understand how everything fell apart so quickly." Sarah listened to David's pain and confusion, knowing that she was responsible for all of it. The man she had once thought she loved was now begging her for help to save his reputation and his marriage, completely unaware that she was the source of all his problems. "What can I do?" Sarah asked, though she dreaded hearing the answer. "You know Emma better than anyone," David pleaded. "Can you talk to her? Can you help me understand what evidence she thinks she has against me? I swear to you, Sarah, I have never cheated on Emma. I don't even know who this Lisa Chen person is. Someone is setting me up, and I think it might be connected to whoever poisoned Emma." David's words hit Sarah like a physical blow. He was right, that someone was setting him up, but he had no idea that the person destroying his life was the same one he was asking for help. The irony was unbearable, but Sarah found herself agreeing to talk to Emma on his behalf. "I'll try," she said weakly. "But Emma is convinced you betrayed her. It's going to be very difficult to change her mind." "Please," David said, his voice breaking. "I love my wife more than anything in this world. I would never hurt her, and I would never cheat on her. Someone wants us to believe I'm guilty, but I don't understand why." After hanging up, Sarah sat in her living room staring at the wall, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she had done. She had not only tried to murder her best friend, but had also destroyed an innocent man's life with elaborate lies. David was facing potential criminal charges for a crime she had committed, based on an affair that existed only in her imagination. The next day, Sarah visited Emma in the hospital with the intention of somehow undoing the damage she had caused. But when she arrived, she found Emma more determined than ever to see David prosecuted. Emma had been working with Detective Harrison to build a case against her husband, providing timeline details and motive theories that painted David as a calculating killer. "I should have seen the signs earlier," Emma told Sarah as they sat together in the hospital room. "David was probably planning this for months. He married me to get access to my inheritance, then tried to kill me so he could start a new life with his girlfriend. The only thing that saved me was that he didn't use enough poison." Sarah listened in horror as Emma described her theory of the crime. Emma had taken the false evidence Sarah provided and constructed an elaborate narrative that cast David as a cold-blooded murderer. The worst part was that Emma's theory was logical and convincing, based on the lies Sarah had carefully crafted to deflect suspicion from herself. "Emma," Sarah said carefully, "are you absolutely certain about the affair? Maybe there's another explanation for the things I noticed about David's behavior." Emma's eyes flashed with anger. "Are you defending him now?" "Sarah, you were the one who told me about seeing his car at that apartment complex. You showed me the photographs. Are you saying you made all of that up?" Sarah found herself trapped by her own deceptions. If she admitted to lying about David's affair, Emma would want to know why she had fabricated such elaborate evidence. If she continued to support the lie, David would face criminal charges for attempted murder. "I just want to make sure we're not jumping to conclusions," Sarah said weakly. "The police investigation is still ongoing. Maybe they'll find evidence that points to someone else." But Emma was no longer interested in alternative theories. She had found an explanation for her near-death experience that made sense to her, and she was committed to seeing David punished for what she believed he had done. Over the following days, the case against David continued to build. Detective Harrison had interviewed Lisa Chen, who confirmed that she knew David as a customer at the bank, but denied any romantic relationship with him. However, Emma interpreted Lisa's denials as proof that she was lying to protect David. The media attention around the case intensified when local reporters learned about the love triangle angle. Headlines like "Bride Poisoned by Cheating Husband" and "Wedding Day Murder Plot Exposed" appeared in newspapers across the state. David's construction business began to suffer as clients canceled contracts, unwilling to work with someone suspected of attempted murder. As she held the bottle of pills, Sarah thought about Emma lying in that hospital bed, fighting for her life because of poison Sarah had given her. She thought about David's confused pain when Emma accused him of attempted murder. She thought, about the innocent woman, Lisa Chen, who was now being harassed by reporters who believed she was involved in a murder plot. Sarah realized that taking her own life would be one final act of cowardice. It would leave David facing criminal charges with no way to prove his innocence, and Emma would never learn the truth about what had really happened to her. The only way to begin making amends for what she had done was to face the consequences of her actions honestly. Sarah woke up the next morning with a clarity she hadn't felt in weeks. She had made her decision during the long, sleepless night. Instead of taking the pills, she had torn up the suicide note and written a new confession letter, one that she intended to deliver personally to Detective Harrison before David's arrest. She dressed carefully that morning, choosing a simple blue dress that Emma had once complimented her on. It seemed fitting that she would wear something that reminded her of their friendship on the day she would finally tell the truth about what she had done. Sarah looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back at her. The guilt and stress of the past weeks had aged her dramatically. Before leaving for the police station, Sarah made one final phone call to David. She couldn't tell him what she was about to do, but she wanted to hear his voice one last time before destroying any chance of the relationship she had once imagined they might have. "Sarah, thank God you called," David said when he answered. "My lawyer says they're going to arrest me this morning. I still can't believe this is happening. Emma actually thinks I tried to kill her." "David," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I want you to know that everything is going to be okay. The truth will come out, and you'll be cleared of all charges." "How can you be so certain?" David asked. "The evidence against me seems pretty convincing, even though I know I'm innocent." "Because I know who really did it," Sarah said, then hung up before David could ask any questions. Sarah drove to the police station with trembling hands, rehearsing what she would say to Detective Harrison. She had practiced her confession dozens of times, but she knew that actually speaking the words aloud would be different. She would have to admit to attempted murder, to lying to the police, and to destroying her best friend's marriage with fabricated evidence. Detective Harrison was surprised to see Sarah walk into the station asking to speak with him urgently. He had been preparing for David's arrest and wasn't expecting any new developments in the case. "What can I do for you, Sarah?" he asked as they sat down in the same interview room where they had met before. Sarah took a deep breath and looked directly into Harrison's eyes. "I need to tell you the truth about what happened to Emma on her wedding day. David didn't poison her. I did." Harrison's expression didn't change, but Sarah could see the sharp intelligence in his eyes as he processed her words. "That's a very serious confession, Sarah. Are you sure you want to make this statement without a lawyer present?" "I'm sure," Sarah replied. "David is about to be arrested for something he didn't do, and I can't let that happen. I poisoned Emma with ricin that I stole from a chemistry lab. I put it in her champagne glass when she stepped outside during the reception." For the next 2 hours, Sarah told Detective Harrison everything. She explained her affair with David, her jealousy of Emma, her decision to poison her best friend, and her subsequent lies about David's infidelity. Harrison listened without interruption, taking detailed notes and occasionally asking for clarification. When Sarah finished her confession, Harrison leaned back in his chair and studied her face. "Why are you telling me this now? You could have let David take the blame and probably never been caught." "Because David is innocent," Sarah said simply. "I destroyed enough lives already. I couldn't let him go to prison for something I did." Harrison arranged for Sarah to be formally arrested and charged with attempted murder and obstruction of justice. As the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, Sarah felt a strange sense of relief. The weight of her secret was finally lifted, even though she knew her real punishment was just beginning. The news of Sarah's confession sent shockwaves through the small town of Millbrook. The media quickly shifted their focus from David to Sarah, trying to understand what had driven a woman to poison her best friend on her wedding day. The story of jealousy, betrayal, and attempted murder captivated audiences far beyond the local area. David was released immediately, and all charges against him were dropped. However, the damage to his reputation and his marriage seemed irreparable. Emma learned about David's affair with Sarah from the confession, which confirmed her worst fears about his faithfulness while revealing that her best friend had been the one who tried to kill her. Emma's reaction to learning the truth was complex and devastating. She was relieved to know that David hadn't tried to murder her, but she was shattered by the revelation that he had been unfaithful with her best friend. The woman she had trusted more than anyone else in the world had not only betrayed her romantically, but had literally tried to end her life. David tried desperately to repair his marriage, begging Emma to forgive him for the affair and to understand that he had ended things with Sarah long before the wedding. He explained that Sarah had threatened to tell Emma about their relationship if he didn't leave her, but that he had chosen Emma and their future together over his affair. Emma struggled to process all the revelations at once. Learning that both her husband and her best friend had betrayed her left her feeling completely alone and unable to trust her own judgment. She had nearly died because of Sarah's jealousy, and her marriage had been built on David's lies about his faithfulness. The legal proceedings moved quickly. Sarah pleaded guilty to attempted murder and received a sentence of 15 years in prison. During her sentencing hearing, she addressed the court and apologized to Emma and David for the pain she had caused. She acknowledged that her actions were inexcusable and that she would spend the rest of her life trying to understand how she had become capable of such violence. Emma attended the sentencing hearing, sitting in the front row and staring at Sarah as she spoke. When Sarah looked in her direction, Emma's expression was unreadable, a mixture of anger, hurt, and something that might have been pity. Emma never spoke to Sarah again. David and Emma's marriage survived, but it was forever changed by the events of their wedding day. They underwent extensive counseling to rebuild trust and communication. Emma's physical recovery from the poisoning took months, and she suffered long-term effects, including kidney damage and chronic fatigue. The psychological trauma took even longer to heal. 2 years after Sarah's sentencing, Emma and David renewed their wedding vows in a small private ceremony attended only by immediate family. Emma wore a simple dress, very different from the elaborate gown she had worn on the day she was poisoned. The new ceremony was their way of reclaiming their marriage and starting fresh without the shadow of Sarah's betrayal. Sarah served her sentence at a women's correctional facility 3 hours away from Millbrook. She used her time in prison to earn a college degree and participate in counseling programs designed to help inmates understand the root causes of their criminal behavior. She wrote letters to Emma and David regularly, though neither ever responded. In her letters, Sarah tried to explain her actions without excusing them. She wrote about the jealousy and insecurity that had consumed her, the poor decisions that had led to the affair, and the moment of madness that had driven her to poison her best friend. She expressed genuine remorse for the pain she had caused and acknowledged that she might never be forgiven. The story of the wedding day poisoning became a cautionary tale in Millbrook and beyond. It was discussed in psychology classes as an example of how jealousy and obsession could drive people to unthinkable acts. Local marriage counselors used the case to illustrate the importance of honest communication in relationships and the devastating consequences of infidelity. Emma, eventually, became an advocate for victims of poisoning and domestic violence. She spoke at conferences and support groups about her experience, helping other survivors understand that healing was possible even after the most traumatic betrayals. Her story gave hope to people who had lost faith in their ability to trust others. David rebuilt his construction business slowly, focusing on smaller projects and gradually regaining the trust of his community. He never fully recovered from the guilt of knowing that his affair had been the catalyst for Emma's near-death experience, even though Sarah alone was responsible for the actual poisoning. Sarah was released from prison after serving 12 years of her sentence. She moved to a different state and took a job at a nonprofit organization that helped formerly incarcerated women reintegrate into society. She never tried to contact Emma or David again, understanding that the best way to honor their healing was to stay out of their lives permanently. The three lives that had been so intertwined on that wedding day had taken very different paths. Emma and David had found a way to rebuild their love and trust, stronger for having survived such a devastating betrayal. Sarah had faced the consequences of her actions and found a way to contribute positively to society, though she would always carry the weight of what she had done. The shocking events of that single day had changed all of them forever, serving as a stark reminder of how quickly love can turn to obsession, and how one moment of madness can destroy everything.